Whereas in the show, it turns out she really was a good person. And so I just missed seeing the complicated side of that, Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the book A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, published in 2019. And I'm comparing it with the TV show created by Poppy Kogan, released in 2024, and is currently streaming on Netflix. And since this is a new release, I will begin with my spoiler-free thoughts, beginning with the book, and I will just say that I loved this book. It was engaging, it kept me on my toes, the reveals were surprising, it was one that I just wanted to keep reading and I did not want to put down. And while there are certain things about it I maybe wasn't as crazy about, like it wasn't a 5-star book, and yet at the same time it was a captivating mystery thriller that I would highly recommend. And I started out with the audiobook, and then over time I switched over to reading it. But when I was listening to the audiobook, it was reminding me so much of the podcast Serial, which was popular like 10 years ago. That's when I listened to it. And in season 1, she talks about the murder of Hae Min Lee, who was a high school senior who was murdered, and they arrested her boyfriend for the crime. And so the format of the audiobook was reminding me of Serial, but also the case itself had a lot of similarities. And the woman investigating the crime in Serial, she felt like the boyfriend had to be innocent because he was such a nice guy. My cat is messing with my lights. Anyway, so she thought he was innocent because he was such a nice guy. She's like, he couldn't have done this, which is similar to Pippa in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And then the case details itself, there are some similarities there. And then also there is one aspect of this book that was very reminiscent of I Know What You Did Last Summer, like so similar that she clearly must have done it intentionally. And so I'm not saying that this book is derivative of other books or real cases, because it is a unique book and I think she did a great job, but I think she definitely took inspiration from real life cases as well as maybe some other mysteries. But again, I loved this book and I would recommend it. And with the TV show, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a solid adaptation. Of course, they do make some changes, some more minor than others. And some changes I really didn't make sense to me, which we will get into. And then there are also some themes from the book that are lost in the show due to some of these changes. And so that was unfortunate. But nonetheless, I still think they did a great job adapting this and I really enjoyed it. I watched it all in one day, which was very easy to do because it sucked me in. And then before I knew it, I was finished with it. So it is one I would recommend. I would recommend it to fans of the book, but I would also recommend it to people who just want a fun mystery thriller. And I saw reviewers complain about the lead, Emma Myers. I saw people complaining about her British accent and how it was inconsistent and you could tell she was an American faking a British accent. But I had never seen her in anything before, and throughout this whole show, I had no idea she was an American, so her accent fooled me. But from here on out, I'm going to be getting into the details of the plot, which means we will have spoilers going forward. And this is broken up into the timestamps as always, so you can jump around as you please. And be sure and like and subscribe and comment your thoughts on the book, the show, and what I have to say about it down below in the comments, and let's talk about it. So I'm going to begin with just the case overview. So Andie Bell is a pretty popular high school senior who goes missing, and shortly after her disappearance, her boyfriend Singh is found dead, and it appears he committed suicide, and right before he took his own life, he had sent a text to his father, which appears to have been a confession to Andie's murder. However, 5 years after this, we meet Pippa, who herself is now a high school senior, and she knew Sal, and she always liked him, and she never felt like he was capable of having murdered Andie, and so for her senior class project, she decides to solve the Andie Bell case. And in the show, everyone she tries to interview initially, like they all rebuff her, although some come around over time. Whereas in the book, it seems like people were more open to talking to her about this. For example, Ravi is the younger brother of Sal, and in the show, when she first approaches him to interview him, he tells her to go away basically, and he doesn't want to talk about it. However, in the book, he is very open right from the start. But that's also because in the book, the first thing she says to Ravi is like, I want to investigate this murder case because I believe your brother is innocent. So right off the bat, he knows she's on his side. Whereas in the movie, she goes back later to apologize and she tells him like, I think your brother was innocent. I knew him and I don't think he did this. And so that is how she wins him over in the TV show. And throughout the book and show, she and Ravi then become a team and they work together to try to find the real killer. And in both, we learn that Andie's dad was harsh. In the book, we get more specific. Like we hear the way he was emotional emotionally and verbally abusive to his wife and kids, whereas in the show, it's more vague. They just say that he was controlling. But his treatment of them in the book, it caused Andie and her younger sister Becca to act out in different ways. And in the book, Pippa, very early on, like Jason Bell, the father, is one of her first suspects. However, in the show, it feels like he's never really a suspect. It's not until the last episode, then there's talk of him being like, oh, he wasn't at this event the whole night. He could have been up to something. And so for a couple minutes, we think that maybe he was involved in the murder, but then it is quickly dismissed. Whereas in the book, yeah, Pippa suspected him like right from the start. And in the book, she comes across Becca and she goes up to ask her some questions. And at first, Becca is like, okay, like I'll talk to you. But then it doesn't take long for her to be like, you know what, this is just too tender and I'm not ready to talk about this. Whereas in the show, again, people weren't as eager to talk to Pippa about this. And in the show, Becca, she tells Pippa, like, stop prying into this, like, leave us alone. But in the book, we learned that Andie was a bully. And we find out that the reason she is like this is in large part due to the way her father treats her at home. But yeah, she was a pretty awful person. For example, there was a girl at school named Nat who was very pretty and looked a lot like Andie. And so Andie saw her as competition. And so she texts Nat pretending to be this guy that everybody knows Nat likes. And she gets Nat to send her a topless video. And then Andie shares this video with all of the class, with all of the school. And so Nat is humiliated and her life is just kind of ruined after this. And we also find out that she was a drug dealer and she would even sell roofies, apparently not caring how they were used. And in the book, we are always hearing about what a great guy Sal was, how he was the nicest person, he was amazing. But then it's like, if he was so nice and amazing, why was he willing to date such a horrible person? Because in the book, he knew what a bully Andie was. He knew what she did to Nat, right? And that wasn't like minor bullying. That is like a horrible thing to do. And when people ask him about that, he's just like, oh, you know, that's Andie's stuff. Like, I'm not going to get involved. That's Andie's drama. And it's like, well, by being her boyfriend, it's almost like you're condoning her actions in a way, right? Because you're not doing anything about it. You're still dating her. And so I felt like that quite didn't add up. However, we do find out in both book and show that he does threaten to break up with her when he finds out she is dealing drugs. And so they get in an argument about that shortly before she dies. But in the TV show, Andie is not seen as a bully or as a mean person. She is a drug dealer, but we find out she is dealing drugs because she's trying to get enough money so that she can run away from her father. Whereas in the book, I guess she just wanted to have money, I suppose. But yeah, and then also in the TV show, Nat, she is one of Andie's best friends in the show. And we hear that she had nude photos that were leaked. Do we ever find out who leaked those photos? I feel like they never came back around to that and we never find out. And so in the show, I don't think it was Andie, unless I missed something. But yeah, so that was huge right there because nobody knew who leaked the photos, whether or not it was Andie. And so it's not like Sal or any of the school knew Andie was the one who did it. Whereas in the book, everybody knew it had been Andie. And in the show, when Pippa is talking to Andie's two best friends, they say how like when Andie liked you and talked to you, it felt like the sun was shining on you and it was amazing because she was a great person. And they do say this in the book, but then they go on to say like how she was manipulative, right? Like she could make it feel like the sun was shining on you one minute and then shun you the next. And so she was just so messed up to her friends, which again, we don't really see in the show. And in the show, it definitely looks like Andie truly loved Sal because she was saving up money to run away from her dad, but she was going to run away with Sal and they were going to go off and live their life together. And so it seems like she truly loved him. Whereas in the book, she was pretty messed up towards Sal. She was cheating on him for one, which we will get into later. And yeah, I don't think Sal realized she was cheating on him. And in general, I just didn't love that the show made Andie be a good person because I liked in the book that we see how because she has been missing and assumed to be dead, people therefore see her through rose-colored glasses and they're like, oh, you know, this innocent, sweet, white blonde girl, she was an angel and now she's taken and she's been killed. And then of course you have the racial thing because her boyfriend was Indian. And so some people are racist being like, oh, like this Indian guy killed this white girl, right? And so you have that going on. But yeah, on the show, this theme of casting Andie as an angel is something that we get into more in the book, which I really loved. Whereas in the show, it turns out she really was a good person. And so I just missed seeing the complicated side of that, you know? And I'll actually be touching on that even more later in this video. But to move on to Max Hastings. So in both, Max is a friend of Sal's. And so they had this friend group consisting of Sal, Max, this other guy. There's like this other guy in the friend group in the movie, but he literally has no dialogue. He's just there in the photos. But yeah, yeah, so it's that random guy, Max, Sal, and Naomi. And Naomi is the sister of Kara, and Kara is Pippa's longtime best friend. And so that is how Pippa knew Sal, is because Pippa's best friend's sister was friends with Sal. But in both, we find out that Max bought drugs from Andie. However, he says like he didn't know her outside of buying drugs from her. However, in both, when Pippa is talking to him in his room, she finds like this sexy photo of Andie. And so she's like, if you didn't know her, how did you get this? And he claims he just found it at school. And then also in the TV show, I don't think they ever address why this photo was at the school. But anyway, in the book we do, which I'll get into later. But then also in the book, someone also tells Pippa that they saw Max getting snuggly with Andie at a party. And so that combined with the fact that he has this photo, she's like, clearly he knew Andie better than he's saying, and they must have had something going on. But the place where they saw Max getting cuddly with Andie and the place where Andie would sell drugs to Max and other people were at these parties called calamity parties. And Pippa goes to one of these in order to find out who the dealer was that was supplying Andie the drugs. And so in the show, the drug dealer is there at the party and she goes and talks to him, but nothing is really revealed in the show when she meets him. Like, he tells her where she kept her stash and that she had a burner phone, but that's it. Whereas in the book, she gets the number of the drug dealer at this party, and then she later tracks him down and confronts him, and it's this guy named Howard, and she blackmails him with the help of Ravi. And in the book, he is someone that she suspects could have been involved. Also, Andie's car was found near where Howard lived, and so yeah, she definitely thinks he could have been involved. Whereas in the show, she has that one interaction with him, and then that's it. But in both, the drug dealer does tell her again about Andie's burner phone and where she kept it and her stash of drugs. And so Pippa decides that she is going to break into the Bell household in order to find this burner phone and get the information that is on the phone. However, when she breaks in, the burner phone is gone. However, she does find this paper that is written in code talking about Andie's clients and the drugs they're buying. And then to move on to Sal's alibi. So in the book and show, Sal claimed that he was hanging out with his friends, including Naomi and Max, until past midnight, the night of Andie's murder. And if he was with them past midnight, that is very strong evidence that he couldn't have killed Andie. And so that is what he tells the police, that he was with his friends past midnight. However, the friends admit to the police that actually Sal left at 10:30. He asked us to lie for him, saying he was there with us past midnight, but that's a lie. He actually left at 10:30. And so that, of course, is very incriminating against Sal. However, in both, Pip finds out that Sal was telling the truth. He really was there past midnight. However, the friend group, minus Sal, had previously been involved in a hit and run, and they abandoned this guy who was in critical condition. And someone found out about this. And after Andie's disappearance, they received a threatening note being like, you need to lie about Sal's alibi, or else I will turn you in for this hit and run. And so they lie and say he left at 10:30. And in the show, Naomi voluntarily tells Pip this because she tells Pip about Max's real Facebook page or Instagram account, which goes by a different name. And in that Instagram account, she finds a photo, which it's pretty loose evidence because it's a photo of the friend group minus Sal with a clock saying it is past midnight. And so she's like, Sal is the only one who could have been taking this photo, which means he was there past midnight. But if you're going to use that photo against the police, like, that's such loose evidence. Like, anybody could have been taking that photo. So to say like it had to be Sal behind the camera, like, who's to say it could have been anybody? But regardless, this evidence is what Pippa finds, and she's like, wow, Sal must have been taking this photo, which means he was telling the truth. And so yeah, in the show, Naomi voluntarily leads Pippa to this Facebook page, whereas in the book, Pippa finds Max's Facebook page on her own, and then she confronts Naomi about it, and Naomi tells her the truth. But prior to finding out the truth about Sal's alibi, Pip in the TV show starts to suspect that maybe Sal did commit the murder, and so she's starting to doubt his innocence. And a thing in the TV show that is not in the book is that Pippa, right before Andie died, the day Andie died, she was at school and she saw Andie crying, going into a room, and then shortly after that, Sal walked up to her being like, oh, have you seen Andie? And Pippa tells her where Andie is, and she has always thought of that, being like, if Sal was guilty, then me telling him where Andie was could have contributed to the murder. And so she feels guilty about how she could have contributed, potentially. And so that is partly why she wants Sal to be innocent. That way she can know that she did nothing wrong, and telling him where Andie was. And so she tells this to Ravi, being like, I think Sal might be guilty. And then she tells him her personal story, and Ravi gets upset, being like, wow, so you've given up on Sal, and also you claimed to have wanted to prove Sal's innocent, but this was all about you all along. You wanted to feel like you didn't have anything to worry about, that you did nothing wrong. And so he just gets very upset and he storms off. Whereas in the book, Pippa, she might have moments where she's like, was Sal innocent? But ultimately, she stays pretty firm the whole time that he was innocent. However, she does get a transcript of his interrogation, and in the interrogation, they ask him about being in a fight with Andie leading up to her death, but he will not tell them what the argument was about. And so she's like, oof, like that makes him look bad, not wanting to come forward about this argument. Like he's holding back so much from the police, like that's suspicious. However, she finds out that he was arguing with Andie about the fact that she was a drug dealer. And when he was interviewed, he thought Andie was alive. And so he didn't want to tell them what the argument was about, because then Andie would get in trouble for dealing drugs. So that is why he was withholding information. But yeah, in the book, she never doubts Sal as much as she does in the TV show. But in the book, Ravi does get mad at her, but it is because Pippa is threatened by someone who is texting her, telling her to stop looking, and they steal her dog. And so they tell her, like, you need to stop investigating if you ever want to see your dog again. And so in order to save her dog, she tells Ravi, like, I'm giving up on the case. It's over. I'm not doing this anymore. And he gets really upset and he storms off. However, on his own, he thinks about the fact that her dog has gone missing and just her personality and how this isn't like her. And so on his own, he pieces together, like, she must be stopping the investigation to protect her family. And so he later goes back and apologizes to her for getting mad. But to talk about the threats she has been getting. So she gets some paper notes telling her to stop digging. But then someone from an unknown number is also texting her to stop. And the person who is texting her is the one who steals her dog. And in the book, they steal her dog and then they tell her, like, if you ever want to see him again, come to this location and let me see you destroy the evidence. And so she destroys her computer and all of her evidence. However, Barney, her dog, is later found dead in a lake. And so her dog still died, even though she destroyed the evidence. Whereas in the show, she gets a text from the killer. And so she has the bright idea to post on social media being like, I've been researching the Andie Bell case and I have solved it and I will reveal what I know tomorrow. And she does this as a way to lure the killer to her. However, this just angers the killer and they end up taking her dog. And so they tell her, if you ever want to see your dog again, you need to not reveal what you know. And so then she posts a follow-up video being like, oh, that video yesterday was a joke. I don't have anything to report. It was a lie. However, her dog still is found dead. So even though she did what the killer asks, her dog still dies in both book and show. But to move on to Mr. Ward, he is a teacher at the school and he is also the father of Kara and Naomi. And in the book, early on, Pippa finds out that Andie had called Mr. Ward an a-hole to one of her friends, but Andie did not have any classes with him. So she was like, why would Andie be mad at Mr. Ward? And so she asks him about this and he's like, oh, it's because I found out about her bullying Nat. I found out what she did. And so he had told her, like, you need to stop this, otherwise I'm going to report you and you will be expelled. And so because of this, Andie was angry at him. And this is not in the show. We never hear about Andie being mad at Mr. Ward. But Pippa finds out in both book and show that Andie had been dating a secret older guy. And she finds the number of this guy, like, amongst Andie's things. And then later, Naomi calls Pippa using a phone with an old SIM card because her phone broke. And the SIM card, she says she found in her dad's office drawer, is the same number as secret older guy. So she finds out that Mr. Ward, Kara and Naomi's father, is the older man who had been sleeping with Andie. And she also finds out that Mr. Ward is the one who had been sending her the paper threats. And Mr. Ward claims to be a tutor, but when Pip finds out his involvement with Andie, she gets a ride home from him and then she purposefully leaves her phone in his car and she has turned on location sharing with Ravi. And so after she leaves his phone in the car, she and Ravi are watching on Ravi's phone to see where Mr. Ward goes. And he goes to a location where his family used to live, but he claims to have sold the house. But clearly he hasn't, because then he goes there and spends a few hours there. And so in the book, after a few days, eventually Pippa decides on her own that she is going to go to that house when Mr. Ward goes there. But before she goes in to confront him, she calls the cops, telling them where she is and that they need to show up. And then she goes inside and confronts Mr. Ward. Whereas in the show, it's a little different. different because she does use her phone to track him, but Ravi is not involved. She just tracks it at home on her computer. And then when she sees where he is, she is messaging Ravi, telling him the address, telling him to call the cops, and then she herself drives to go see him. And so in the book, Mr. Ward tells Pippa that Andie had been flirting with him, and he had recently lost his wife and was lonely, and so he's taken with this pretty teenager who is flirting, and eventually they sleep together. However, after the second time, he regrets it, and he tells her, like, this has to end. However, she doesn't want it to end, and so that is why she hides a picture of herself in his classroom, being like as her way to get back at him in some way, or as a way to make him look incriminating, I guess, by having a picture in his classroom. But it is this picture that Max ends up finding. But yeah, she is upset that he wants to end things. And one night they get in an argument about this and he pushes her and then she leaves. And then the next day she is reported missing. And he's like, whoa, like I didn't kill her, but all trails will lead back to me. And then they'll find out that I was like sleeping with a teenager. And so he decides to pin it on Sal. And he knows about the hit and run his daughter was involved in because he read her diary. And so he is the one who threatens them, being like, you need to lie about Sal's alibi. And then he kills Sal, and then he plants evidence on Sal. However, later, he then sees Andie out walking, and she's like messed up on drugs. And so she's a little confused, and he takes her in, but he's like, I can't take you back to your family because then I'm going to get in trouble. So then he keeps her hostage in this house, but he says like, oh, but I treat her so well, I swear, like she's in the attic and she's doing fine. But then when Pippa goes up there to see Andie, she realizes that that is not Andie. They look similar, but it is not her. And as soon as she has this realization, the cops show up, arrest Mr. Ward, and take this girl. Whereas in the show, Pippa confronts Mr. Ward, and he tells her that yes, he was sleeping with Andie. However, in the show, Andie is the one who wanted to end things with him because, you know, she claims like, oh, I love Sal, I can't be with you anymore. But yeah, so she wants to end it with him, which makes him upset. And she also wants money from him, which he can't give her. And so they get in an argument and he pushes her and she hits her head and then she leaves. But he's like, that's it though. Like nothing else happened, I swear. But then as soon as Pippa believes him, she then hears a sound from the pipes coming from upstairs. And so she runs upstairs to the attic and she sees a girl in his attic. However, it is not Andie. It is just some girl. And in the show, the girl, she goes up there to talk to the girl and the girl tells him like, yeah, Mr. Ward picked me up and he helped me out. And then when I was alone with him in this house, he told me that he murdered Sal. And when I tried to run away, he stopped me and he kept me hostage. And Mr. Ward also then locks Pippa in the attic too. But then Ravi had called the police. So ultimately the police come and rescue Pippa and this girl. But a difference is that in the book, Mr. Ward, he had convinced himself that this girl he picked up really was Andie. Like he wanted to believe it so bad that she was still alive. So he convinced himself that this was her. And the girl herself, she had been involved with drugs, but she also had a mental handicap. And so she herself, after so long, she believed she really was Andie. So when Pippa sees her, she tells her like, hi, I'm Andie. And so she thinks she is Andie Bell, essentially, and she also just isn't mentally all there. Whereas in the TV show, Mr. Ward knows that this is not Andie, and the girl doesn't believe she's Andie either. She tells Pippa the whole story. So the details on her are a little different from book to show. But in both, Pippa realizes that, she realizes that Mr. Ward killed Sal. However, he did not kill Andie and he did not kill her dog Barney. So she's like, the person sending me the paper threats were from Mr. Ward, but the person texting me threats and killing Barney, that was someone else. And that someone else is who actually killed Andie. And so she needs to figure out who this second killer is. And in both book and movie, Pippa pieces together that Max is the one who bought roofies from Andie. And remember, I said that in the book specifically, someone had seen Max getting close with Andie at a party, but she realizes that that had been Becca because Becca, Andie's sister, look very similar. So she's like, oh, Max was with Becca and he was buying the roofies, so he must have roofied Becca. And in the book, she hears from Becca's friend that after the calamity party, Becca wanted the morning after pill, but she never explained anything. But Pippa pieces together that she wanted the morning after pill not because she had consensual sex, but because she was drugged and raped. However, in the TV show, Becca told her friend that she was drugged and raped. And then the friend tells this to Pippa. But yeah, in the book, Pippa kind of pieces it together herself. So anyway, she finds out that this happened to Becca and that she truly must have been the one to kill Andie. And so she goes to talk to Becca about this, and Becca admits that yes, she killed Andie because Andie came home from getting in a fight with Mr. Ward, which Becca didn't know about. And Becca told her what happened to her at this party. However, in the book, Andie is a jerk and she doesn't care, and she's just very mean to Becca. And so Becca's upset by this and she pushes Andie, and Andie has an existing head wound from the fight with Mr. Ward. And so when she's pushed, she hits the wall and passes out, and then she starts vomiting and chokes and dies. Whereas in the show, when Becca tells Andie, it seems like Andie is apologetic. However, she tells Becca, like, I can't help you turn him in though, because I'm the one who supplied the roofies and I will get in trouble. So I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. And then she tells Becca that she is going to run away. And Becca is upset because that means she will now be alone with their father. And so she gets upset, pushes Andie. Andie dies like she does in the book. And so yeah, Becca admits all of this to Pippa. However, she had drugged Pippa and she plans to kill Pippa. However, in the book, she still has the location sharing with Ravi turned on. And so Ravi is able to see where she is and save her. Whereas in the show, Kara tells Ravi that Kara has location sharing on Pippa, and the two of them go and save Pippa just in time. And then in the end of the TV show, Pippa confronts Max, being like, I'm not going to stop until everyone you have attacked has been avenged. Whereas in the book, Max is arrested on like sexual assault and rape. And so he is going to be tried for that, as well as the drug dealer. He is also arrested in the book. But to talk about the book message, which I touched on earlier, because at the end, Pippa presents her experience with this case like she's giving a speech in front of an audience about all of this. And in the speech, she says, there are a handful of people who carry the blame for what happened that night and the days following, morally, if not criminally. These are Elliot Ward, Howard Bowers, Max Hastings, Becca Bell, Jason Bell, and do not forget Andie herself. You have cast her as the beautiful victim and willingly overlooked the other layers of her character because they don't comfortably fit your narrative. But this is the truth. Andie Bell was a bully who used emotional blackmail to get what she wanted. She sold drugs without care or regard for how they might be used. We will never know if she knew she was facilitating drug-assisted sexual assault, but when confronted with this truth by her own sister, she could not find it in herself to show compassion. And yet, when we look closer behind this true Andie, we find a girl who was vulnerable and self-conscious. Andie grew up being taught by her father that the only value she had was in the way she looked and how strongly she was desired. Home for her was a place where she was criticized and belittled. And then she goes on to talk about the Singh family and the way the neighborhood had treated the Singhs. And then she has Ravi come up and talk about Sal, his brother. But then to just kind of run down the other changes that the TV show made. So one very unnecessary change that was made is that at one point, Pippa finds out that Victor, her stepdad, and her mom were like having a rough patch and he went and stayed somewhere else. And Pippa basically suspects that he had been cheating on her mom. Either that, or it seems like she also feels like he might be involved in the Andie Bell case. Like that's the vibe I was getting, that now he was potentially a suspect. And we find out that that's not true and that he and her mom were just going through a rough patch, but that he didn't have an affair and he did nothing wrong, essentially. But yeah, I was like, why is this tossed in here where she suspects her stepdad? And I didn't like that addition and it felt really pointless. But also there is this hotel that they find out Andie would go to with secret older guy. And in the book, they go to this hotel and they ask the lady working there if she has seen Andie. And they show her a picture and she tells them like, oh yeah, I saw her the other week. And they're like, wait, no, we meant like, have you seen her 5 years ago? Because she's been missing for the last 5 years. And so then the lady gets confused and her grandson walks up and he's like, oh, she has Alzheimer's. She gets confused. You know, her dates are messed up. And so that is how they explain her response, saying that she saw her recently. And then this happens in the TV show too, where there's this dismissive desk clerk and they show her a picture of Andie and he's like, yeah, I saw her the other day. And they're like, wait, she's been missing for 5 years. How could you have seen her? And he's like, well, then I guess I was mistaken. And then in the TV show, we never come around to this again. But in the book we do, we find out that when Becca found out that Pippa was snooping into the case, she is the one who had Andie's burner phone. And so she saw the text between Andie and secret older guy. And so she knew that they would meet up at this hotel. And so Becca went to the hotel to ask some questions. And Becca looks a lot like Andie. And so this lady thought that Becca was Andie. And that's why she said like, oh yeah, I saw her just the other week. And also in the book, there is a journalist named Stanley Forbes, and at the time of the murder, as well as afterwards when Pip talks to him, he is very adamant that like Sal is guilty. And he says some pretty messed up things about Sal and his family. But then also he comes up later because Howard, the drug dealer, she sees Stanley meeting up with Howard. And then also Stanley is dating Becca. And when Pip reaches out to Stanley, he tells Becca about it. And so that is how Becca knows beforehand, like right away, that someone is investigating the case again. And the TV show totally gets rid of this character, which I was fine with, honestly. That change didn't bother me. But the show also, after they find out that Mr. Ward was guilty, Ravi then tells Pippa that he is going to leave town. Like, now that this case is solved, I'm going to move on with my life. And Pippa is very sad because she has, been falling in love with Ravi. And this was not the case in the book. Ravi never leaves town, but it's dramatic in the show because he gets on a bus to leave. And this is when Pippa goes to confront Mr. Ward. However, Ravi decides to get off the bus, and then that is when he and Kara go save Pippa. But yeah, this was not in the book. And Nat had a brother named Dan, who I have not yet mentioned, but he is a cop. And in the show, we see much more of him because in the book, we hear a lot about him. In both book and movie, we find out that he had slept with Andie when she was underage. But in the book, she only actually talks to him once, whereas in the show, she has many run-ins with him. And in the show, he shows her footage from Sal's interrogation video. And in the TV show, Sal is very violent and angry during the interrogation. And so that makes him appear guilty. Whereas like I said, in the book, he appears sort of suspicious because he won't say what he and Andie were talking about. And then Dan is also suspicious to Pip because he had known about the hit and run that Max and Naomi were involved in. And then the book also has this added plot detail of Pippa has to write a paper about who she is, her identity basically. But she's like, I don't know who I am. And so she has a hard time writing this paper because of her lack of self-identity. And this felt unnecessary. And it felt like the book just tossed this in to be like, oh, we need more character depth. So I'll just add in this paper Pippa has to write and how she doesn't know who she is. But by the end of the book, she has a more clear idea on her identity. And yeah, again, it just felt like it was just tossed in there to add more depth. But it was fine, but it didn't really do much for me. And we kind of get this in the show as well. And in the book, she talks about how she has no connection to her birth father because he died when she was so young. And this causes some awkwardness between her and her mom because her mom wishes the daughter would have a connection to her dad, but she doesn't. And so, yeah, we see this in the show too. And again, it was fine, but I could have done without it. And when it comes to book versus TV show, so like I said, I enjoyed the TV show. However, there was nothing about it that really stood out. There was no specific performance, there was no scene, there was no plot detail that will stand out in my mind for years to come. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars because it was entertaining and interesting. But yeah, there was just nothing out of this world about the TV show. However, maybe I'm biased because I went in knowing who the killer was. And so if I went into it not having read the book, maybe it would stand out in my mind, right? Because the reveals were so surprising, but because I knew the reveals, the show, therefore, it's not going to make a lasting impression on me necessarily. It was just a fun show to watch. But having said that, if they continue the series, I would continue watching the show. And same goes with the book. Like I said, I really loved this book. The reveals took me by surprise, and I want to read the rest of the books in the series. And then when it comes to book versus show, the book wins. Partly because, yes, I'm biased. That was how I first experienced this. But also, like I said, I really like the complicated way they show Andie and how she wasn't as good as the town makes her out to be. But also we see more about how the Singh family is treated and the racism and how they are shunned by the town because they think Sal is a killer. And so the movie, we get one scene where we see that they are mistreated by the townspeople when someone graffitis on their home. But the book delved into that aspect even more as well. But I will say, in the book, why didn't the Singh family just move away? If I were them, if my son, who I believed was innocent, had been convicted of a murder and because of that the town hated me, I would move away. I wouldn't be staying there, but that's just me. But yeah, regardless, the book wins. I did prefer it over the show. Let me know your thoughts down below. And yeah, I feel like people who didn't read the book, I think they would like the show even more because I do think the reveals really are surprising. And when I read the book, I was kind of trying to figure it out, but I had not suspected the way this would end up. Although I will say when she interviews Mr. Ward in the book and he tells her the truth about why Andie was angry at him, she's like, oh, thank goodness, now I don't need to worry about Mr. Ward. But it's really? Like, what about the fact that he could be lying? Like, you're not suspicious that maybe he's not telling you the truth? Which, by the way, in the book, he really did tell on Andie about her bullying, and he threatens to tell her parents, and that was part of the reason they got in an argument. But he says, like, if you tell them about me sleeping with you, then I will tell them about your bullying. And so we can both ruin each other's lives, essentially. Although, to be fair, her being expelled from school doesn't seem as bad as what would happen to him if she told on him. But anyway, yeah, that is book versus show. Let me know your thoughts down below on A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.